I'm just reflecting on the amazing work that you've both done in this space over the last decade in particular, and just in the very recent months, the work that I've been doing through Politics in Colour. And a lot of what you have spoken about today is definitely reflected in the conversations that we've been having with particularly Indigenous women in political leadership. I'd like to just mention a couple of things from what we've heard in our experience, and then also go back to both of you to talk about Indigenous women in leadership, because you've both been running programs like Murra and Straight Talk that has been empowering, enabling Indigenous women in leadership for many, many years. Just in terms of the last year with us interviewing women, women of colour and also Indigenous women in politics, what we're finding is that, and this is reflected in your research as well, is that it tends to be a convergence of a number of things that are coming together that enable Indigenous women to make that decision to take that step into politics. And sometimes what we find is that just a little bit of encouragement from a mentor that they've been able to access through one of our programs has been the tipping point for them. They've shown up with all the capability, the life experience, the professional experience, and certainly the belief in themselves. But what we found is that we've just given a little bit more of encouragement to them and just exposed them to a little bit more data, and that's kind of been the light bulb that has really switched on and motivated them to actually take that step into politics. So it's been really, really interesting and exciting to see the change in certainly women of colour, and particularly Indigenous women in stepping into politics. In terms of your own programs, like I said, Straight Talk, Michelle Deshong, you've been running that for several years, over 700 women through that program. Michelle Evans, your Murra Indigenous Leadership Program, in particular focused in business. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and the influence and impact you've had on Indigenous women in leadership in your respective programs?
Maybe before I pick up on the programs, can I just respond to what you're saying before, Kat, because I think it picks up on a piece that we started to kind of explore a little bit in the chapter, which is that supply and demand piece. And all of us in this kind of Zoom yarn are really focused, including the programs Michelle and I work on that supply piece. We're really interested in individuals and supporting individuals and really making a song and dance about how much Indigenous leadership is out there, and that really the issue comes to these sort of places like parties, for instance, for them to kind of really open up their eyes and start to think differently and obviously change their processes. But I think there is the demand side of things, and a little bit of what you were saying about with leadership as the more general concept is, when a person comes to your program, Kat, who feels, ready, but it's just that it's an external perception on what you can do. And having that relational endorsement is absolutely, like, in order to kind of go into that space of leadership, you need to have that, and almost a collective endorsement, which is what representation is. You become the embodied sort of person for that group of people, the trusted voice to respond to the issues of that particular electorate, to be really in touch with what's going on, or or that particular state or territory if you're in the Senate. And I think that's the piece, isn't it? And it's really what we're missing in the research is it comes down to that kind of voter perception. And you have kind of pointed out also there is that bias in the electorate around when they are presented with Indigenous candidates or candidates of colour, do they choose candidates like that? Is it about the party? Is it about the candidate? I mean, there's lots of research on these sort of things, but now to try and think about it beyond the machine of getting people there, like I think there's also a space, and it's something that I've started to turn my mind to, is that I've been so focused on that supply side of things that I haven't really had the space, or my qualitative research doesn't let me really be able to kind of do a much more empirical quantitative view around voter demand and perception for the candidate. And I think that is a part of the conversation that we're trying to have, and just really pointing that out. But I will say that it is an honour and a privilege to work with Indigenous leaders and to create spaces where you see people not only collectively come together and create new things and transform, but think about and be received by the group as someone who is got something great to offer. Just being able to get that external perspective and get that endorsement and a little bit of a crew to run with, to be a part of, is just absolute magic. It really can embolden a person to jump to that next step and to really go for it. But I guess in my program in particular, and I'm always excited to hear about Michelle's program, it is about what I get excited by is when I see not just individuals but groups come together and start to create something new and try and change the discourse. And we've seen so many great Indigenous movements and collective kind of movements over the past 10 years. It's and the connection to our political representatives is always there. So I just don't think the way that we silo business and politics and the arts and community is helpful, because I mean we're seeing all of those sort of things come together in individuals who go into these roles. So we need to be able to kind of speak across that.
Thanks. I totally agree with what Michelle said, and I guess in some ways it probably lends itself to where I was going to go with the answer to this question, and that is the question of political participation, right? And so for me, one of the things, you're right, leadership and politics and governance and all those things become intricately connected. But importantly, in a conversation about politics is the conversation about political participation, and even your choice not to participate is in itself political, right? And so one of the things that's emerged out of the Straight Talk program, whilst it was originally set up to be a preparatory program to getting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women to stand as elected political representatives, what we have seen over the course of these 12 years that we've been running the program is we got a very different result. But regardless of that result, it's still very politically motivated. So, for example, I talk a lot around women positioning themselves as change agents. So that might be the person who wants to be up front and be the political candidate. But what I also know is that culturally there's a lot of things about the way people behave and interact with each other that for some people that is not the end game, right? But what it does mean is you can build on their strengths to collectively support the political candidacy of others. So, to me, some of the conversation, people are like, oh, no, I don't want to be the public face. I'm not prepared for that. But I'm absolutely happy to be the community organiser. I'm going to be the campaigns director. I'll do the marketing material, whatever that is. So there is a way to bring anybody into the political space to build on the strengths of purpose that they particularly have. And that's one of the things I think is absolutely relevant in the program. And so over the course of the 12 years that we've been running the program, both nationally and in regional areas, there's a small percentage that would have put their hand up to run for a political office. Now, that political office includes both local government, state, and federal. So, people that need to decide where they feel like their best energy is served. And for a lot of the community kind of orientated individuals, that more localised approach tends to be the one that they want to start with. But also what we have seen is, rather than necessarily being in those formal ways of stepping up for election, we've seen them take on political challenges in their communities, right? So they're now running some campaigns, they're creating social movements, they're getting involved in conversations. And what cracks me up is I reckon there's more Black women watching Question Time now as a result of that program than ever before. And that's despite everything else that's happening politically. But for some people, it was this thing off in the distance that we sort of knew about but we didn't understand. And what the program seeks to do is kind of, in layman terms, tell you how the system works. And then when you watch something like political commentary or the reports in the paper about some sort of political change, to think about it differently, to interpret it differently, to ask the questions about what are they not telling me in order to kind of position where that power and influence can occur. So, that's one of the best things that comes out of a program like this is, we had a 70-year-old woman who did the program who basically walked away going, I'm going to get that flag flown at the council building if it's the last thing I do. Right? And that's a really big political issue for her regional area in Western Australia. She was 70 years old and said, what hope have I got? But she proved it. She proved it because she was around a group of collaborative women who wanted to support each other in it, but more importantly, trying to change the position amongst each other to say, well, we got to champion each other because it's already hard. If we're not championing each other, then we're kind of creating space for others to diminish our worth. So the first thing we've got to do is at least back each other in at that level. And, I think it just goes to show that there are different places that people can put their energy. Some of them have changed jobs. Some of them have, even changed relationships in their lives as a basis of kind of getting perspective on different things. And we've seen a lot of women from the Torres Strait participate in the program, and that in itself is another kind of political system with the Torres Strait Regional Authority. And for years we could only, there was only ever 3. And then finally, as a result of some really intense work in that region over the past 8 years and through some of these political programs, we've now got 5 Torres Strait women on the Torres Strait Regional Authority Board, and that's a huge deal because that's a huge political machine for that region. So, that's one of the things that I think comes from creating these spaces. We might build the framework, but for every group that comes together, it's a different dynamic, it's a different purpose, and the outcomes are just the stuff that gives you the that fills the cup, that makes you go, that's the aha moments, or that's the thing that makes you want to keep going in terms of the work that we do. So, the more that we can create those spaces, and of course, Kat, the politics and colour conversation is one that's kind of putting people front and centre. And just the other side of that was in the Straight Talk program, what we try and do is match up participants with female politicians so they get time and space. So they're not the giants or the untouchables or the people that are out of reach. Once they get to sit with them and ask questions and appreciate their perspective, it then kind of breaks down some of those barriers of thinking about what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I also just add, I guess, a party perspective on that as well? Because I think, I'm totally with you, Michelle, and it's just super exciting to be on the ride with all the people that you get to be connected with through the teaching and the work that we do. But in the one excellent example, like what you're suggesting in the ARC research I've been doing on Indigenous political representation and participation, has been the clear standout example of the Queensland Indigenous Labour Network. And that's been work that group, or successive waves of that group, have been doing for over 20 years, 25 years, of building an Indigenous-led space. And then going forward and changing party rules systematically at state conference, or getting new things on the policy agenda of state, or even changing a systems rule within to get an Indigenous person as the key person to work with the new Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs in the government. Those sort of absolute structural changes that group have been able to do and continue to do, and now potentially becoming a branch that can register members in the party as well. Like, these are enormous kind of structural changes in a system like a party. And I really do point it out because it is successive kind of waves of Indigenous members of that particular party who have really committed to doing such great change together. And it has really encouraged more people to come into that and to create more accessible ways and culturally safe ways for Indigenous members to join. And I think that's what we want to see in any party. But I really want to kind of pay tribute to all of those Quiln members who have just done an incredible job.
And I think added to all of the influences that both Michelle Evans and Michelle Deshong you've had in empowering Indigenous women in leadership, I guess having social media platforms and being able to showcase the work that you're doing, and also the groups of women, the cohorts that you bring into your programs year on year. That in itself, using social media to showcase that in itself is really building the momentum and mobilising people to get involved and to be a part of that movement. I really can have experienced that myself with Politics in Colour. The power of social media, just being able to put a small group of people together to tell their stories and talk about their experience in politics has been incredibly powerful and impactful for a lot of aspirants, a lot of people thinking about it but not quite sure.
Absolutely, Kat. We'll be running programs in Melbourne at the University of Melbourne, in New South Wales at UNSW, and in Queensland at QT, and applications will be live in March. Wonderful.
Well, I'd like to thank you to political scientist Michelle Deshong, Dr. Michelle Evans at Melbourne University, and also Dr. Meredith Martin, again from Melbourne University. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Michelle and Kat. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you.